right. Thank you all for reconvening as we close our day-long symposium on what the rest of Texas can learn from El Paso. We close with a conversation focused on immigration and the border. Ruben Garcia has sheltered migrants in El Paso for over 4 decades. Serving as director of Annunciation House, his organization works with people on both sides of the US-Mexico border who are experiencing homelessness with various needs, including food and housing, and providing information on how to complete legal documents to claim asylum in the United States. Luis Figueroa is Chief of Legislative Affairs for Every Texan, a public policy nonprofit. He joined Every Texan in 2018 as the first legislative and policy director. Previously, he served as general counsel for Texas State Senator Jose Rodriguez and executive director of the Texas State Hispanic Caucus. And moderating our panel is Angela Gutierrez, who helped us frame the day during our first conversation of the symposium. She is news director at public radio KTEP and a multimedia editor for El Paso Matters. And with that, I turn the program over to Angela.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you to all of you for being here today. The Texas Tribune's had a wonderful day, what we can all learn from El Paso. And so welcome to our panel about the border and immigration. And I can't think of a more fitting place, El Paso, Paso del Norte. We've been a place of passage for hundreds of years. And the Spaniards who came through here also created the Camino Real, the royal road that went all the way from Mexico City through El Paso up to Santa Fe. So, but of course, there have been people here long before they arrived. We all know that, indigenous people. And of course, there were people here before there was a Texas border. That's a whole other panel. Someone can set that one up. So the border is we all know, a hot button political issue, but for us, it's part of our history. It's a part of our daily lives. Never have people been talking more about the border. Pollsters tell us it's the #1 issue, immigration, as far as this election year. So it's an important topic, and it's also important to have a reality check. And we have 2 people here who are going to give us that, who know both from on-the-ground work and in terms of how policies affect people. So thank you both, Ruben and Luis, for being here. Let me start with a question that will help us delve a little deeper. So both of you deal with people often who are not from the border or come here for the first time. What do you think is the biggest misconception that you have to dispel when you talk to people? So either one of you can start.
Yeah, happy to start. First of all, let me say thank you to the Texas Tribune and everyone here. My mom used to work just down the road at Health and Human Services on El Paso Drive, so it's very much a coming home story, and I really appreciate that. I also wanted to mention we appreciate all these topics. You know, immigration is I think it's fitting that it's the last topic because all these other issues, healthcare, education, economic development, are the ones that hit home the most for people, particularly the people of Texas. They're issues that we work on every day at the Texas Ledge and are drafting policy about. And when it comes to these misconceptions, we just came from the Rio Grande Valley, and I've been hearing this all over El Paso también, is that this perception that immigrants are something to be feared is just so disconnected from reality. When we talk to El Pasoans, Rio Grande Valley, and people from the border, they are affected by the migration in the sense that they see it as a humanitarian crisis. And thank God for people like Ruben Garcia, who is helping provide some of that relief and the housing and the supplies. But it's not an issue of safety. It's not an issue of border security. It's an issue of economic development. It's an issue of humanitarian crisis. It's an issue of how we can address the flow of migrants who are dealing with these issues in their home countries. And so I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. In the Rio Grande Valley, we heard this story. They have this conference of clerks. 500, 600 people show up. They had it in the Rio Grande Valley. Only half of the people showed up because they were so scared of being kidnapped or being attacked or whatever else the myths were out there. And they lost out on so much money, so much resources. They were doubling security, buying walkie-talkies for folks. Of course, nothing happened. Everyone had a great time, and they all said, well, I can't wait to come back to the Rio Grande Valley. It's similar to El Paso. It's a beautiful community with so much to offer, and there's just this misconception of what's going on the border when it comes to migrants.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks to the Texas Tribune for the invite to have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time reflecting on our border and immigration. I actually get asked to speak to a lot of groups that come to El Paso, and they ask if I would be able to spend some time with them and share some things for them. And I have been emphasizing the following. If your group came down to El Paso to learn about the immigration issue, you came to the wrong place. If you want to learn about the logistics and the mechanics of how we respond to significant numbers of individuals who are crossing over, if you want to learn about how Border Patrol is actually responding on the ground, on the scene. So if you want to know about logistics, you want to know about the mechanics that are involved in the movement of all these people, El Paso is a great place. And for that matter, any border city would be a great place for you to go to see and learn about the logistics and the mechanics. But if you want to learn about the immigration issue, I want you to go back to wherever you're from. Tomorrow morning when you get up, you get your cup of coffee, you walk out your front door, you cross the street, and you knock on your neighbor's door. And when your neighbor answers, ask them, would you be willing to sit down with me and share a cup of coffee? I want to listen to what you think about immigration. That's where you're going to learn about the immigration issue. We're here under the impression that there's an immigration issue that has some profound intellectual, theoretical explanation. It's not. Go talk to your neighbor and have your neighbor say, oh, isn't that terrible? All those illegal people and the crime they're bringing and the drugs, oh, it's just terrible. Oh, all those people and they're going to kidnap people. And oh, isn't that all just terrible? Those are your neighbors. When Biden comes to the border, when Trump comes to the border, they're not talking to me, they're not talking to Luis, and they're not talking to Angela, and they're not talking to you. They're talking to your neighbors in the interior. And I think it's just really important for us to understand that when all is said and done, we are one of the pawns that is caught in this entire immigration push and pull that's going on.
Well, for people who aren't familiar with Annunciation House, Ruben, you've been doing this humanitarian work for decades, nearly 50 years, I understand. So what has changed over the years? Who is coming to the shelters, the temporary shelters, houses of hospitality? Kind of take us through your day.
When Annunciation House got started in 78, and we started receiving the first refugees. At that point, it was primarily from Mexico, from El Salvador, some from Nicaragua, from Guatemala. When the refugees would arrive and they would cross the river, Border Patrol didn't have the resources to respond the way that they do now. It's a whole different world. At that time, the resources weren't there, and so it was fairly easy for people to cross the border at that time. They would cross the border, they would arrive at Annunciation House, they were basically looking for hospitality. When I would sit down with them and I would ask them, ¿por qué se vinieron? ¿Por qué dejaste El Salvador? ¿Por qué dejaste Guatemala? ¿Por qué te viniste de Mexico? Why did you come? Two answers. I'm afraid, or I can't feed my family. After the symposium, I want all of you to get on buses and I want you to come with me and we'll go to one of our hospitality sites and you ask the people there, ¿por qué se vinieron? They're going to give you two answers. I'm afraid, or I can't feed my family. 50 years have passed and the answers haven't changed. What has changed? You and I have changed. That's what has changed. This really is a conversation about what has happened to us. What is happening to us? Who are we?
Real quick, an aspect of the way you respond, it also involves Border Patrol and ICE. How do they figure in? I mean, they do take people and drop them off near the hospitality houses or at the houses. How does that work?
I think it's really important for people to understand, again, going back to logistics and going back to the mechanics that are involved. Your Border Patrol officers, you've just apprehended a group of 15 individuals. You load them onto your vehicles. You transport them to what is called a central processing center. It's a huge facility on Gateway South. And there you're going to process everybody. You're going to fingerprint all of the adults. You're going to run those fingerprints through their databases to see if any criminality gets kicked out. Those databases are pretty sophisticated. They combine FBI, DHS, immigration, Interpol, and the databases of various countries south of the border. And they want to check to see if your fingerprints kick anything out. The reality is that immigration does not have detention facilities for families and family with children. They just don't have them. So they're going to have to release them unless there's criminality. And when we're talking about families, it's a very, 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 very low percentage where criminality is involved. And even with single individuals, just today, because I get the text messages from what is called the Border Patrol Situational Report, today they released close to 400 single adults, okay? So single adults, heavily male, but also some female, and they've all been processed and they've all been released and they go to hospitality sites. Border Patrol releases individuals because they have no detention space. They could release individuals, families, to the street. They don't want to do that. That's where we come in. So they contact us and say, can you receive? And we do the best we can to have the number of hospitality sites that are necessary to receive them all. What is distinctive is to realize the impact on local behavior depending on who's sitting in the chair in the White House. It literally filters down the attitude. I find it so much more human, my interaction with Border Patrol, with ICE, with Homeland Security investigation, with Office of Field Operation. And I'm really, really grateful for much greater humanness in how people are being treated. And I know that I'm speaking in generalities, but that is something that I'm finding really gratifying and I'm very grateful for. And they're dealing with a lot of human beings just like we're dealing with a lot of human beings.
And so for people who don't understand, people are released, not just that's the end of it. They go through a whole process and an immigration court decides whether they can stay or not. So they're awaiting their court proceedings. And most do move on fairly quickly to other places. And as you said, this work's been going on during multiple administrations. Luis, so how has your organization, Every Texan, been drawn into the legislative issues surrounding immigration and border enforcement, and why?
For sure, and I appreciate what Ruben said about how the issue of migration for the migrants hasn't changed, but it has changed for us. And I think you see that very clearly in the Texas legislature. In 2001, we were the first state to pass in-state tuition for undocumented students. We did it before California, and we were one of the first states to keep it going throughout all these decades. We're about to approach the 25-year anniversary of the so-called Texas Dream Act. What has changed over the years, and started really in 2007, is this attempt to try to make states the enforcers of immigration. And for years, we were able to put a halt on a lot of those proposals with a coalition of business, faith-based, and progressive advocates, civil rights educators, and really explain that this would be bad for business, be bad for agriculture, be bad for our students. But the polling continues to get worse and worse. And I think it's important to mention that because when we talk about talking to our neighbors, it's clear that we are not reaching our interior neighbors when we talk about migration. And this is why these events are so important, to educate people outside of El Paso that don't have that interaction with migrants, that don't know a dreamer, that don't know a migrant, or they do, they see him as an other. They don't have that personal connection. And so what we've been trying to do at the Texas Legislature is provide some of those stories, provide some of that insight, also fielded with data and research. And that's really where we came in. We are a research and data organization, but we realized our research and data wasn't going to be enough if it didn't have the stories behind it. And that really came to a head in this session when SB4 came to the body, and it was clear that there was a completely different narrative than we had seen in previous legislatures in terms of how the state was going to react to the immigration, and this complete attempt to subvert the federal immigration system and build a state immigration system. Thankfully, it's been halted through the courts because of work at Las Americas in El Paso County, who have filed a lawsuit and have got it prevented. But I think it shows you that it's El Paso County leading the way in fighting it. It's El Paso residents, it's El Paso NGOs that are in the trenches around this fight. And we want to build on that and take that to other cities, take that to other places. So you'll see we have a people's budget survey in there. We were trying to get the priorities of the state from all over the state of Texas. We encourage you to fill out and take that pledge so that we can go to the legislature and say, look, we went to Rio Grande Valley, we went to El Paso, we went to all these places, and you know what they're talking about? Their need for education funding, Medicaid expansion. You know what they're not talking about is the need to have state, local police enforce immigration laws. And so we need your help, and that's what we've been taking on this past year.
Well, let me drill down a little bit. I think there's a lot of agreement across the political spectrum that the current immigration system is broken. Some may blame the federal government for some of the issues we're seeing on the border. So Governor Abbott says he needs to step in as the chief enforcer for Texas and set up Operation Lone Star. Why shouldn't he do that?
Yeah, I'd say there's three main reasons. So first and foremost, and this was borne out with Sheriff Wiles used to talk about this quite a bit, El Paso County Sheriff Wiles. The police and law enforcement need to work with immigrant populations to address crime. And if they want to know where the stash houses are, where the drugs are, they work with undocumented populations. If undocumented populations are scared to report and talk to police and scared to talk to their local sheriffs, then that just makes us all less safe. So that's number one. Number two is the Constitution. It seems like there's a lot of lip service to the Constitution, but the Constitution does say that the federal immigration system should be handled by the federal immigration authorities, the Border Patrol, and they are directly in conflict in working with the Biden administration. The Biden administration is saying, you guys are a hindrance to our efforts to protect the border, to address the situation. You are making it harder for us to do our jobs. And then lastly, it's the economic issues, right? So we've seen this in Florida, crops going down, the economic impact of migrants. There's no question, especially during the pandemic, migrants were the frontline workers that were keeping our economy going. And it was in construction, it was in the food service, it was in all these industries. And as someone pointed out earlier, the migrants who come over, they have jobs waiting for them half the time. So it's a two-way street, and I feel we sometimes forget about the other side of that.
So Ruben, your mission has been the humanitarian response, but you have found yourself in the middle of the political controversy. Lawyers were sent to Annunciation House, the Texas Attorney General's office. The Texas Attorney General says he wants to shut you down, and even use the word stash house. So can you explain kind of where we are and what's happening in that process right now?
This all was the result of the fact that Ken Paxton visited El Paso and he didn't have a place to go to stay, and we didn't let him stay at Annunciation House, and so from there are the consequences. So you got to be careful when you say no at the door. Obviously, I can't answer for the thinking on the part of the Attorney General in deciding to come after Annunciation House. what we know is that they have come after Annunciation House. They've been very, very clear. They want to shut down Annunciation House. They say that we are smuggling, we are trafficking, that we are operating stash houses. I am particularly taken aback by the use of that kind of language, because in the environment which we're in, and the unpredictability of human beings that could generate or motivate someone to do something that would be horrific. And El Paso is one of the cities that can very legitimately speak about horrific anti-immigrant violence. Right now, there are some things that are going on with Annunciation House. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to be able to speak about them right now. It will get dealt with in the courts, and that's something I'm very, very grateful for, that the process of the submission of a request to examine has been taken out of the process of dealing with it outside of the court system, and a district judge has said, no, we're not going to work with it that way. We're going to put it inside of the court, and we're going to follow the procedures of, the rules of evidence. Requests are all going to have to come through the courts, so that the court then passes a decision on whatever requests are forthcoming. There are some things that are going on behind the scene, and we'll have to just wait and see how they work out.
Beyond the court case, what would, a lot of people are watching this, faith-based organizations, in particular churches, what does this mean? And if this did succeed, what would closing your doors mean for this region and maybe other organizations that are watching this?
I think it's important to go beyond faith-based. You need to understand that the Attorney General of Texas is under the belief that in their supervisory role of all incorporated entities in the state of Texas, that they have the authority to knock on the door of any incorporated entity and submit a request to examine. They can knock on the door of Walgreens at CVS. They can knock on the door of a restaurant. They can knock on the door of a newspaper. They can knock on Angela's door and submit a request to examine. And in that request to examine, it says, we want to come in, and we want to come in now. And we want to look at everything and anything that is on paper, that is on a hard drive. And we want, if we want to be able to make copies of these and take them with us. So I want to emphasize that this is an authority that should be of concern to anyone who is incorporated in the state of Texas. I also want to emphasize that, and this I'm providing you from the Attorney General having submitted this kind of request to Media Matters, a national organization that does a lot of think tank work, where they were requested to submit information, and Media Matters in their response to the court made the point that even if nothing comes from a request to examine, if you say no and nothing comes from that, the simple act of submitting that is going to be damaging. So we're suffering the effects of them having submitted that. This is then escalated when you reference it specifically to your faith-based communities who are acting in their belief system. So there you have the confrontation between the state and church, and whether or not the Attorney General has this. The effect of this are volunteers who left Annunciation House. We had 3 volunteers who said to us, you know what, I need to leave. I can't be here and run the risk that I'm going to get swallowed into this. And so it has caused volunteers to ask, Ruben, if you ask me to drive someone to an appointment at UMC or at San Vicente Clinic, am I at risk for doing that? And so it's making people stand back. It's making people say, I don't want to house refugees in my church out of concern of where this might take me. So even though nothing has happened, you can see the point that Media Matters made when they said the simple act of submitting this kind of a request harms organizations like Annunciation House, and that's very, very true. Right now in El Paso, and I think that this is perhaps something that is distinctive to El Paso, is El Paso's human response to refugees is built on a tripod. One leg of the tripod is your NGO network. This is all of the churches or individually funded groups that are saying, we will receive refugees when they are released. So Annunciation House coordinates a network of maybe 15, 16, 17 churches and other groups. And so when Border Patrol says we're releasing 400 family members, 500 family, I distribute them over this network. So that's one leg of the tripod. The other leg of the tripod is the County of El Paso through what they call the Migrant Service Support Center, and they work primarily with the single individuals. So when I mentioned earlier that today there's like 400 single adults that are being released, they're all going to the Migrant Service Support Center that the county is operating. The third leg of the tripod is the city of El Paso. They have a school, a middle school that they purchased, that they retrofitted to be able to provide emergency housing on an as-needed basis. And equally important, their FEMA funding is reserved to then rent hotel rooms if the numbers grow beyond what the other two legs of the tripod can handle. This tripod structure is what has allowed El Paso to handle very significant number of refugees. If you mess with any one of the three legs, you're going to have a real serious challenge before you.
We're going to open this up pretty soon, so think of your questions. I have a couple more. Luis, I wanted you to touch on something that Ruben mentioned. The idea that the state can override the federal government in terms of immigration authorities, one thing, but this is declaring that there's an invasion and that migrants pose a danger. Why is that consequential beyond the legal fight? I mean, obviously, we all know in El Paso there was a mass shooting and the person carrying it out used the word invasion at a Walmart.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just say one thing about the law that the AG is using to go after the Annunciation House. That bill, previous to 2023, required as an element of the crime a pecuniary interest, which means money had to exchange hands or the smuggler had to receive some type of monetary benefit in order for that to be a crime. That was removed in 2023. And when that happened, we told the legislator, how are you going to protect churches? How are you going to protect humanitarian organizations? And the author was like, no, we would never use it against Catholic organizations, against religious institutions, against shelters. And even when there was a challenge legally, the appellate court threw the case out saying, these churches don't have standing because this law will never be applied to them. This is not going to apply against shelters, not going to apply against church groups. And here we are, lo and behold, they're going after Annunciation House. So there is a huge disconnect, I think, between both what the law is intended and what the AG is doing, but also I think it shows you sometimes the intended and unintended consequences of some of these bills that are masked around border security and what they're really aimed at. To your point about the invasion rhetoric, after the shooting here in El Paso, outside the Walmart. There was a lot of conversations with the governor and lieutenant governor, and they said we were going to tone down the rhetoric. We're not going to use that invasion language anymore. We're going to try to be more respectful. That lasted about a few months before they realized that invasion clause or that invasion language rallies their base and it gets them motivated. What it also became was a legal theory. As you all may know, U.S. v. Arizona was a Supreme Court precedent that said that the federal government is in charge of immigration laws, and states cannot just go and decide who is undocumented and documented, who can be deported and who can't be deported, because we have to have one system of immigration laws. We don't want one person to be lawfully present with employment authorization in New Mexico, and then they go to Texas and, oh, actually, no, you're undocumented and you don't have employment authorization. That makes no sense. You got to have an entire federal system to make it work. And so the way they're getting around that Supreme Court precedent is they're trying to say that this is an invasion. This is an invasion from another country, and they really ratcheted up that language. I have been really harping on this in some of my testimony, that language is not only dangerous because it's completely flawed legally, but because of the dangers that it creates and the message that it sends to communities like El Paso, where someone came all the way from outside of Dallas to come and shoot Mexicans because he believed that there was an invasion in El Paso. That language is dangerous. It is not built on any type of valid legal theory, and it's really morally reprehensible to be using that language of invasion. So we're going to keep pushing back on that language, but it has turned into beyond a rally cry or a whistle for the right, but also turned into a legal theory that is making its way through the courts.
Well, Ruben, and then we're going to take some questions. So many Americans seem to think migration is someone else's problem to solve. And I've heard you ask, well, what if instead we looked at this as a more collective responsibility? And, we've seen that, as you just described, happening in El Paso, the response. But how do you envision this taking place maybe beyond this region or nationwide as a way to manage the situation?
Recently, I receive calls from journalists specifically in Denver, Chicago, New York, because they have been the recipients of buses that initially started being sent up there by Governor Abbott, filled with refugees. And there are still buses that are leaving from here in El Paso. Tomorrow, there will be buses that will leave from the Amtrak Union Depot station to New York, Denver, and Chicago. Everyone who is on the bus because they choose to be on the bus. And so there is no coercion of people going, and the bus it doesn't cost them anything, and in addition, the buses drive straight through. They don't make any stops along the way, so it's a shorter bus trip than if you were to take, for example, Greyhound. Unfortunately, and I go back to my original point about getting your coffee, crossing the street, and sitting down with your neighbor. Unfortunately, there is so much information, so many facts, so many truths that have no air to them. We don't hear them. We don't talk about them. We don't sit down and reflect on them. The arrival of the refugees represent an incredible opportunity for the United States to welcome significant number of individuals who want to come. They want to be protected, just like you and I want to be protected. But they're willing to work. They're willing to hold up their end of the bargain. They're willing to work wherever they can find work. They want to be productive members of our churches, of our schools, of our communities. It is an opportunity, especially when you start analyzing the economic reality in developed countries. Isn't it strange that Russia is willing to incentivize economically women to have babies? Doesn't it say something to us that Germany is willing to incentivize women to have babies? That Japan is willing to incentivize women to have babies? That China is willing to incentivize? Doesn't that say something to us? Doesn't it say something to us that we have known for a long time that for the United States or any country in the world to maintain its population, there has to be 2.2 live births in the life of a woman to simply replace present population levels? Right now in the United States, that percentage is at about 1.6 live births per woman in the United States. If you could somehow magically seal off all four sides of the United States so that no one could come in, the population of the United States would start doing this. Not immediately, but it would start doing this to the point where economically you would get to the point where when you go have dinner at the Olive Garden and you're done having enjoyed a wonderful dinner, your waiter's going to come and say to you, now, if you would please pick up your plates and your silverware, go to the kitchen and wash them before you leave. This is real. So it's an opportunity, and we're spending so much time. Look at how much time we've spent in the hour that we've had here talking about pushing back, being against, and no time talking about what an incredible opportunity is before us to just change the mindset to say, let's welcome. The vast majority are healthy young adults. We are the beneficiaries of the teachers that have fled Venezuela, of the doctors that have left Guatemala, of the agricultural workers that have left. We are the beneficiaries. It's a whole different mindset. That's my way of saying we should focus on galvanizing many other parts of the United States. I was asked to speak to a group in St. Louis, and I flew in, and then I had to drive. It was a group of sisters, and I drove through rural areas. There's a town in Missouri that is providing grants to refugees that have employment authorization to help them get a house because they want the workers. This is Missouri, the capital of radical liberalism, Missouri. And here's a town saying, we will pay you to relocate to our small town. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. It's a golden opportunity.
And just if you have a question, go over to that microphone so we can all hear you. And I think we'll be getting some questions from people watching from across Texas. And it's true. I mean, the majority of the migrants I interview tell me they all have jobs waiting for them, or they will have no trouble finding them. So we say, don't come. And then if you do come, well, we have something here for you to do. So that mixed message is spread across the globe. So first question right here. And please tell us your name.
Hi, Malena again. I represent a small nonprofit organization, so I'm just curious what we can do, because legally we don't specialize in everything that's going on, but our community members are directly affected and or represent all of the things that we're talking about today. So I'm just curious what us smaller organizations in comparison to like Annunciation House, what we can do to protect and serve at the same time.
So, it's kind of the same things we've heard a little bit before. One thing you can do is get involved in our People's Budget campaign. I'm going to make another pitch for that. And the reason for that is because we're really trying to get the stories of people who can't get to Austin, who can't be as politically active as the lobbyists that are in and around the Austin area. And so we can get these stories and get the real things that are impacting your nonprofit, your community, your family. We can amplify it and build on that narrative, because the only way we're going to get out of this is narrative changing. The reality is the polling is what's killing us, right? So Texas Tribune, to their credit, does a poll, and every time they do the poll, border security is number one on the minds of voters, particularly Republican voters. Medicaid expansion polls at 70%. It's very popular. Everyone gets that, but people aren't voting on Medicaid expansion. They are voting on a lot of these fear issues like border security. And so if we can start doing some narrative changing, speaking outside of our silos, and start changing some hearts and minds outside of El Paso, because I think we're all, not everyone is monolithic in El Paso. We all have opinions, obviously. But by and foremost, El Pasoans are pretty much united on where they stand on this. We need those stories to reach Amarillo. We need those stories to reach other parts of Texas that are not hearing those stories, and we can help with that. And so I'm just going to make another pitch for just getting involved in organizations that can amplify your message.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Raneem, just a community member interested. I volunteered in the past at Annunciation House and just want to say thank you for all the work that you do. But my question is, in the previous administration, I remember there was kind of like, I guess, a law or some sort of policy that I guess essentially the asylum seekers on their way to Mexico, if they had kind of like more tragic things happen to them, that would like kind of like expedite or improve their case to the U.S. And then when I hear you say like they're afraid or they can't feed their families, like I want to know if that sentiment has changed. I know it's not always dependent on the administration, because a lot of the times Democrat presidents have like similar or higher deportation rates. So I was wondering if that's kind of like the same sentiment that's still going on now. Of like, if kind of like they have more unfortunate things happen to them, it kind of expedites their asylum case like it was previously. That made sense.
If you are a citizen of Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, if you're a citizen of a South American country, if you're a citizen of Haiti, Cuba, your asylum claim will not be based on something that happened to you in Mexico, okay? Your asylum claim is based on, I have a well-founded fear of being sent back to my country of nationality. That's what it is. And we have seen many individuals who have suffered tremendously when they've crossed Mexico or when they've crossed the Darien Gap, and some incredible stories that you will hear as a result of that. So I'm not sure that I'm understanding the reference to that if something bad happened to you in Mexico, that is going to somehow help your case for asylum. If you arrive at the border and you have an obvious injury, you have an obvious medical issue there's a very good possibility that the officers right there at the border are going to call an ambulance and you're going to come in. I don't know that that's going to help you.
Like when the kind of like the Remain in Mexico policies were in place, I heard a lot of that. Like it was kind of like if you are kind of more, I guess, like victimized on your way to Mexico or like in Mexico, you had a better chance of getting a court date sooner, is what I understood.
That's a really good point. And this is something that when President Trump was president, Remain in Mexico was always supposed to have had a provision that if you were able to establish a fear of being in Mexico while you're waiting to have your immigration case processed, because you have to remember that Remain in Mexico meant that I, Ruben, would go through the entire asylum process while remaining in Mexico. I would only come in for the appointments with the immigration judge. But other than that, I would remain in Mexico the entire time. While I am in Juarez, for example, there is tremendous evidence of a great deal of fear that I'm going to get kidnapped. If an attempt is made to grab one of my kids, or if they actually succeed in grabbing part of my family and holding them for ransom, that was supposed to have allowed me to petition to be allowed to enter the United States and to continue my immigration case from within the United States. That was always there. It was not honored during the Biden administration. It wasn't. When Biden came in and he had remained in Mexico, we began to see the number of families that were being allowed in under that exception. It began to increase. Now, Biden fairly quickly ended remain in Mexico, and he allowed everybody to come in who had actually applied for asylum. So in that sense, you are correct. You are correct.
Hi, Peter Schwartzman with Sister Cities International. I'm curious about, over the last 5-10 years, there's obviously been a shift and an increase in folks coming through this area. I'm curious to what y'all think what was the drive with that, and what changed. And then as a sort of aside from it, obviously the Biden administration and others have put a lot of concerns about the current sort of policy or lack thereof as it relates towards asylum seekers and refugees and others coming through our southern border. What would you propose is the solution or solutions that need to occur to help change what's going on here currently?
Sure. So, in my opinion, the solutions haven't changed that much from when we were talking about comprehensive immigration reform from the McCain-Kennedy days in the early 2000s, even after the Immigration Reform and Control Act. I don't think the policy solutions are all that different, right? So, yes, we need to update our quotas. Yes, we need to create a system where asylees can get processed at a quicker pace with more immigration judges. Yes, there can be more, surveillance on the security and address that issue as well. It's all part of that comprehension. I think what's difficult is finding the political will, and I think it's getting harder and harder to get to that political will to go through. And every time we get close to it in Congress, the bill gets a little worse, and it gets more focused on security and less on immigration reform. And even with that, when we saw this in the latest budget debates, even with the big focus on security, it still didn't get through because there was so much trepidation among the politicians to do what they needed to do. And that's why I say it's not about the policies it's about the politics. And that's why we got to do this narrative changing, because if we don't change the hearts and minds and start getting people and the politicians to have a little bit more courage, knowing that they won't get hammered in their primaries, then they'll be more open to what we know are the solutions that have been in the works, in place. Representative Congresswoman Escobar has been very much leading on those discussions. She knows what needs to be done. It's getting her colleagues to go along with her.
I would want to add to that, and this is something that I've been putting a lot of emphasis on. I think it would be very helpful if we took both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, and we could actually go back several administrations back, take a rectangular piece of paper and draw columns, and at the top of each column, put the name of the key administration officials in each administration, starting with the president, vice president, secretary of state, secretary of defense, homeland security, etc. Put all of the key members on the top of one of the columns, and then down the column, write down What are all of the trips each one of these members took during their 4 years? Where did they go? Where did they actually physically go? And what you're going to find out is the majority of administration officials of the different administrations spend their time traveling to take care of issues in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East. And then when you look at who's going to Colombia, who's going to Chile, who's going to Brazil, who's going to Uruguay, who's going to Mexico, and what's the frequency, you're going to see an incredibly lopsided picture. Don't get me wrong. I understand that it's critically important that administrations be going to Europe, to the Middle East, to Asia. I understand that, but not at a total negligence south of the border. Yet, what are we talking about all day today? What is the single greatest issue for the 2024 election? Isn't there something profoundly wrong that what's going to determine who is president in November is immigration, and yet nobody's going south of the border? Isn't there something profoundly wrong with that? Instead of coming and giving requests to examine documents to Annunciation House, the Attorney General and the governor should be giving those requests to examine to all the cabinet officials and the president, vice president of both administration. Where have you guys been over the past X number of years? Because we now are talking about what are the solutions. The solutions aren't going to be tomorrow or the next day. They're going to require long-term planning, and that means long-term attention.
Our last question.
Yes, I would love to hear from the panelists. You know, you spoke about narrative change and community investments and the budget here today, and especially related to immigration. And I would just love to hear what y'all think Texas would look like if we had a state budget that truly prioritized the well-being of Texans, from, you know, here on the border all the way, you know, through the interior to the other side. Can we speak about what we actually see for Texas with, you know, a state budget that centers people and not, you know, harmful rhetoric and policies that take away from the well-being of Texans?
Yeah, okay. But I think it goes to what you said. It's an opportunity for economic prosperity. You mentioned how there are all these countries who are addressing population loss, and we have all these businesses that are struggling and all these economic conditions with inflation. And here we have this huge population of migrants who just want to come in and work and take those jobs that are the toughest to fill, to build in their community. And we've seen it over and over. The vision of Texas is already in place because we are all byproducts of it. We all came from immigrants. We all came from our parents. And many of us have prospered, and many of us have been able to build families of our own. So why are we cutting that ladder off for future generations?
Ruben, I think you need to run for president.
I'm 75 years old, and I've come to realize that I'm not old enough to run for president yet.
You need a little more experience. Any final words, Ruben? If not, we'll...
The only thing that I would say is that obviously, I love your question. I really love your question. What might Texas look like if we invested more in what's already been mentioned in our education system, in Medicaid expansion. It boggles my mind that Texas has so consciously refused to work with the Affordable Health Care Act to expand Medicaid, to make it more. It just boggles my mind. The employment of people, the being able to support the trade schools for our young people. Texas would look so much greater. That Lone Star would be so much more vibrant if that's where our energy, our resources, and our time were to be invested.
Let's give a round of applause for our final panel of the day. I'm going to ask our panel to stay up here as I just offer a couple of closing words. First, I want to remind all joining us in person and online that you can watch any panels you may have missed or revisit today's panel conversations at texastribune.org/events. I also want to thank our sponsors as well as our host, Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center, El Paso. On behalf of the Texas Tribune, I want to thank all of our panelists and moderators and those gathered here in El Paso for your time today to tell the story of El Paso. At a Texas Tribune event last night at the El Paso Museum of Art, held there intentionally to coincide with the museum's border biennial, we discussed the intersection of art and democracy in Texas. Stephen Engel, co-founder of El Paso's Creative Kids, who participated in that conversation, discussed how art can help challenge widespread narratives, particularly narratives rooted in fear. He said that without challenging, after a while, you can even come to believe that's the way it's always going to be. Today, through the voices of community leaders here in El Paso, discussing innovation, successes, challenges, and aspirations across sectors and disciplines, and the questions you posed of one another, you complicated the narrative of this region for Texans around the state and the country watching this program virtually. Thank you all for joining us.